Well, morning, Growth Church. I'm really excited because this morning, although you're not going to get a traditional sort of preach from me, I haven't got a passage of scripture that we're then going to work through. What I am going to offer is a premise or an introduction to our new series, A Kingdom Identity, how to truly be true to yourself. We're going to be in this for 11 weeks, so there's plenty of time to unpack all that we're going to be thinking about. The first section of what we're looking at is who am I? And we're going to be looking at the Bible and unpacking this idea of a kingdom identity being something given to us by God. And then in part 2, we're going to look at how do I grow? So how do we take this and allow it to impact our lives and change our lives in order that we can have more of that fullness of life that Jesus came to give us. I'm really excited about this. But the question you might be thinking is why? Why are we doing this now? Why this series? And we are impacted by this phrase, be true to yourself, all the time. It's everywhere we look. Now, I was watching a interior design TV program just a few days ago. And in it, no less than 3 people, at least once in one episode, stated that they had to be true to themselves. And they said it in such a way that they were trying to justify their existence, tell us that they were valid, tell us that what they were producing was important. One guy went even further and he told us that he had to be true to himself and he had to produce what he felt was right and that he didn't care what anyone else thought about what he produced. But if anyone else didn't like what he produced, he'd be quite upset about it. And I sat there like, I'm pretty sure he's just said 2 contradicting things in one sentence and hasn't batted an eyelid. And so we're clearly a little bit confused about what it means to be true to ourselves. Now, I don't think it's a completely stupid statement. In fact, I think there's some incredible truth in that statement. We do want to be true to ourselves, don't we? I don't want to go through this life with a mask on or playing a part. I don't want to fake it. I want to feel like I'm free and express who I am and that's acceptable to people and that it's okay to be that person. But the question remains, well, how do I know who I actually am? And this statement, be true to ourselves, it means so many different things in our culture. And we've widely just adopted it as true, even within our churches. And we need to look at what it means, which is what I'm going to do in a moment, but also if it's actually working, at least in its current diluted, slightly nondescript form. So recently, psychologist Jean Twenge, she wrote a book called iGen. And in it, she analyses vast amounts of data, trying to sort of unpack what is going on in our culture in terms of things like mental health. And her conclusion is that we are in the worst mental health crisis in decades. She gives us just a few statistics that, 1 in 8 people under the age of 19 have a mental health disorder. 1 in 4 17 to 19-year-old girls have a mental health disorder, half of whom have admitted to self-harming or attempting suicide at some point. The UK government has plans to roll out lessons for 4-year-olds on how to handle depression. Now, of course, there are loads of different factors that are involved in this crisis, but Twenge argues, she concludes that this constant focus on self is a key cause of this crisis. So is our current understanding of being true to ourselves actually making us happier? No, it's not. But I still believe it's a good statement with some good stuff. And if we could just define it, we might end up somewhere that bears a lot of fruit in our lives. Now, there's a guy called Matt Fuller, and he's written a very helpful book called Be True to Yourself. And in it, he lists 5 things that he thinks our culture currently means when it says be true to yourself. So I want to share them with you, and you can see what you think. So the first one he lists in terms of us saying, I'm going to be true to myself, is personal integrity. Now, in the 1998 Tour de France, Team Festina's support car was stopped and found to be full of performance-enhancing drugs. The story then broke that the whole team had been doping, and actually we found out later that it was rife across the sport. The whole team, that is, except one man, and by the name of Christophe Basson. And he stated that his reason for not doping, in spite of the ridicule, the mockery, the ridiculous amount of pressure, and the eventual dropping from the team, was that he'd grown up in a house that was full of love and that had taught him important things about life, and that he didn't have a void within him that meant that he needed to win in order to justify his existence. In other words, he was being true to himself in saying no to doping. He had this personal integrity that said, no, it's not okay. I was brought up to do things in a certain way. So in order to be true to myself, I'm not going to dope. So this is one way we can think about being true to ourselves. The second way, says Fuller, is expressing the real you. And this is the idea that's quite prevalent within our culture, that the real you is in you somewhere deep, deep down, and it's been buried by society that's just put loads of things on top of you. It's told you that you're a certain way, and it's said that this is the way we do things, and all of that has crushed the real you somewhere deep down inside. And basically what we need to do is we need to peel back all those layers. We need to get rid of that authority or that conformity to societal norms or those rules or regulations or whatever it is. We need to get rid of all of that, and once we do, we'll find the real you deep down inside of us, and then we'll be able to express who we really are. The idea is that we ignore the outside voices and we listen instead to the real you inside. And we should do this regardless. It doesn't matter what other people think. To quote philosopher Taylor Swift, haters gonna hate, and so we just got to do it anyway, right? So that's another way our culture can think of this idea of being true to ourselves. Number 3, I feel, therefore I am. And this sort of rolls alongside this idea of expressing the real us, but the idea is that our feelings dictate what is true. Now, don't mishear me here. I think feelings are incredibly important things. They tell us to pay attention to certain things actually that need paying attention to because there might be a problem or an issue. They help us to navigate life, and they shouldn't be suppressed or pushed down. They are definitely something that help us to navigate, but they are not definitive. And the idea with this feelings-led being true to ourselves is experts have got nothing to tell me anymore. You may have read 100,000 books, but you can't tell me what is true or morally right or helpful. You've got nothing to say to me. What is true is what I subjectively feel. What I feel is what is true. If it feels good, it must be right. What I feel tells me who I am. Now, the slight problem that I can see with this is that when I was 8, my feelings would have said what I want to do is stuff my face with sweets and not go to school, but that wasn't necessarily the best thing for me. And my 18-year-old self would have laughed at my 8-year-old self, saying, you didn't have a clue, you didn't know anything at that point. But my feelings changed from 18 to 28, and my 28-year-old self would have looked back at my 18-year-old self and said, you thought you knew. And now in my 30s, I'm sure that my 38-year-old self, when I get there, will look at my 28-year-old self and think the same, and my 88-year-old self will laugh at all of them and say, you really thought you knew, but you didn't. Because our feelings change throughout our lives through different seasons. So to build an identity on how we feel doesn't seem like the most firm foundation to do so. The next sort of idea of what our culture thinks of being true to ourselves that Fuller gives is to live for yourself, not for others. And on the surface, you might think, oh, that sounds very selfish. But actually, this is really prevalent everywhere. You know, this idea of you do you. You make sure that you empower yourself. It doesn't matter what other people are up to. You keep going in your lane. You do your thing. And there's probably some truth in that. But the idea of pushing yourself ahead or above others also a bit dodgy as well. And we don't tend to mind this cultural view too much until someone in the name of empowering themselves pushes in front of us in a queue. Then we absolutely lose our minds. And it won't be just us, every single person in the queue. Did you see what they just... And then one person who's brave enough and just about not British enough will tap on the shoulder and say, excuse me, what do you think you're doing? But if they say, well, I'm self-empowered, I'm living for myself, I'm being true to myself, and being true to myself means I don't want to wait in a queue, where do we end up there? The last one that Fuller gives is overcoming injustice. And so being true to ourselves in this sense means not shying away from important things about who we are. The film The Greatest Showman gives us a great example of this. You know, these people who are shunned by society, called freaks and seen as lesser, they're brought together, form a community, and the story basically celebrates them as valid, precious human beings. This is really important, isn't it? And we can see this also in a fight against racism, saying to people of all colours, who you are is good and important and valid and just as precious as anyone else. So this is something in being true to ourselves that we think, yeah, that should be celebrated. That's a good thing. But what we can see, even with these 5, and I'm sure that there are variations and other things that we can all think of about what being true to ourselves might mean within our culture, is that there's just a massive variation. And what's interesting is that some of them, they are absolutely seen as integral to our understanding of identity within our culture. But if you push them just a little bit, they quickly fall apart at the seams. Let me take, for example, expressing the real you and, I feel, therefore I am. They are both incredibly subjective ways of looking at the world. In other words, they're very based on what I feel and what I think. I remember when Sweden won Eurovision a few years ago. The guy who won, he won with a song called Hero, and he got up in front of everyone. In his acceptance speech, he literally said something like, be true to yourself. Be true to yourself. We're all heroes. And my instant reaction was, you don't mean that. You don't actually mean that. I'm pretty sure that Hitler felt he was being true to himself. He was following his feelings and convictions that some people were less worthy of life. But we wouldn't turn round to him and say, well done, Adolf, for being true to yourself. You're a hero. We would say, rightly, we are morally outraged at your convictions and we completely and utterly disagree with them. See, if we dig a little deeper, what we actually mean in our culture by be true to yourself needs a massive caveat after it. What we're actually saying is be true to yourself. As long as your life and practices completely agree with mine, otherwise you're a horrible person. And we see this disagreement happening all the time. Someone being true to themselves, someone else being true to themselves as they see it. They disagree and they start throwing horrible names at each other. We see this sort of vitriolic sentiment across social media, and we see it in the news. We see it in all sorts of places. Let me give you an example. Quite recently, there was a lesbian rights group who accused Stonewall of discrimination because they said Stonewall had said that if a trans man who is now identifying as a woman could call themselves a lesbian, and the lesbian rights group said that this was discriminative against lesbians. So Stonewall responded by saying that this lesbians rights group was being transphobic. So the lesbian rights group responded by saying, well, you should take the L out of the LGBT because you don't represent the rights of all lesbians. And suddenly you've got these two groups, both of whom are saying, I am being true to myself, but their being true to themselves doesn't agree with the other ones true to themselves, so they started throwing names at each other. We see this in our politics too. Just a number of votes that have happened over the last 5 years, both in the UK and in the wider world, where the sort of rhetoric was, oh, you voted for X, therefore you are a insert nasty, awful phrase here or accusation here. And so what we're seeing is this idea of being true to yourself has lots of different meanings, and when pushed, a lot of them fall apart or they don't agree with themselves. And therefore we're left with this question, well, who gets to say who is really being true to themselves? This is chaos. It doesn't seem to be making us happy, and we don't know who actually has the final say. What we need here is a higher truth. A higher truth than humanity that sets the bar of what it means to truly be ourselves. We need someone to give us our identity. Tim Keller says that identity, if it's to take hold, if it's to have any meaning for us, ultimately has to be given up to us from outside of ourselves, from someone in authority over us. So with this all said, where does this leave us? We need someone as human beings to tell us who we are. Why? So that we can be true to who we actually are, so we can live those lives that are free and fulfilled. And isn't this what we're all looking for? And friends, there is one in authority, God, who tells us who we are as human beings. He tells us that we are precious and loved, we are made in his image, that we matter. And he also gives us purpose and direction and meaning. And so what we want to do over the next few weeks is to sift the gold from what we mean by being true to ourselves. But actually, we want to find out who we are, who God says we are, and be given that identity by one outside of us who is an authority over us, in order that we can actually accept it and believe it and start to live it out. Because we want to be true to who we are. We absolutely do. We just want to find out who we are. So in the first part of this series, we're going to find out who we are, who God says we are. And it's beautiful. It's the best news, better than you can ever imagine. It is so great. And in the second part of our series, we're going to find out how we hold that, live in that, grow in that, so that it bears fruit in us, and ultimately that we can help others as well be true to who they truly were created to be. So I'm excited to take this journey. I hope you are too. So join us. We've got a great study series that's been written by the leadership team. Come and join in. Do the studies. Join us on Sundays. Take on the sermons and really think about them. Join us for worship and be part of our community as we encourage each other and do life together and grow together in finding out who we truly are and all that means for our lives. Blessings.